Today we're gonna talk about fucking cameras and shit. I don't know if I'm gonna make it to the end of the video. So I've spent an inordinate amount of time comparing the GH5 to my trusty Nikon D850. And, you know, if you follow any of the photography community out there, you'll know there's always been the, you gotta have full frame, it's the fucking full frame and shit. If low light, full frame, low light, full frame bokeh, blurry, beautiful bokeh shit. So I ended up going on to Amazon because I have lenses. You know, when you buy into a camera system, you buy fucking lenses. And I have some really nice, sharp, prime, like this is a 35mm Sigma f1.4 for the Nikon. And yeah, I could whip out my Nikon to film full frame video with it. So I kind of went over this already. Why the fuck don't I do that? I mean, it looks beautiful. You got the advantage of the low light performance. But first of all, I don't get 10-bit. I don't get 60 frames per second. I don't get in-body image stabilization. And even if I did, they probably would suck because of the larger sensor size. I don't get a host of video recording tools unless I hook a monitor to it. In order to set this fucking camera up, it's a fucking nightmare to do video. You know, it's doable, but the GH5, I just whip it out. And then I shoot all over the place. That's what she said. So I bought the Viltrox. So I bought the Viltrox M43X. I think that's what it is. Yeah. But basically it's a speed booster. It goes in between a Nikon mount lens and a fucking micro four thirds camera. Any micro four thirds, not just GH5. But basically, and it's a manual aperture, like, and you have to have a non-electronic lens to take advantage of this. So, AKA mostly primes. My 70-200 Tamron doesn't work with this. You know, I'm stuck wide open, pretty much. I can't adjust the aperture on that lens. I can adjust the zoom and all of that without power, but for some reason, the aperture doesn't take advantage of this this mechanical version, which I'm assuming just sticks a pin in to push and pull on manual, unpowered lenses like that. And this has no power. It's a complete manual prime lens, and it's a beautiful, sharp, bokeh-licious lens. So this speed booster that goes in between magnifies the image to this lens. So now if I do some quick fuzzy math, it turns this 35mm into a 24mm lens. So because it magnifies it. And it's a full frame lens, and I'm magnifying it to a small sensor, so I'm getting a bigger picture of it. And it also increases decreases the depth of field significantly by 0.71. So it turns this f1.4 into a f.98. So what you do is you take that 24mm and that f.98, we'll just call it f1, and you double it with the crop factor of the GH5, and you get a 48mm f2 lens. It has all the bokeh-licious, like almost dreamy bokeh. And here's a quick shot of, because cat videos and shit, of how bokeh-licious this lens gets when you put it on the GH5. And because your GH5 has lens stabilization, because your GH5 has sensor stabilization, it does a pretty good job at keeping this lens stable even for video, even while you're walking. Not that you would really walk with this lens, because 50 millimeters means you'd probably see about this much of my face if I was vlogging with it. It's not a vlogging lens. This is a B-roll lens. The lens that I'm shooting now is the native 24-70 equivalent from Panasonic. It's not as fast. It's a f2.8, which turns into like an f3 something constant across the zoom range. But my point is this little $80 adapter, manual adapter off Amazon, while not perfect, is part of a formula for which I can get almost close enough full frame performance out of the fucking GH5. So basically a body that's twice its price in terms of video becomes kind of obsolete for video for me. I will not be reaching for my Nikon except as maybe a safe cam where I can set it up on a tripod somewhere, throw the 70-200 on it, and use it as a secondary safe cam when I'm filming an event or something. Whereas the run and gun walking around camera is going to be the GH5 going forward. And I've learned some amazing things in the process and dispelled some of the questionable things that people talk about. Now, I've watched endless fucking video after endless fucking video discussing low light performance, noise, and ISO. Now, everyone is taking a shit on the low light performance of the GH5, even though I find it to be exceptional for what it is. First of all, if you don't know how to shoot under 1600 ISO, then you need to reevaluate your life. In my opinion, I've already mastered this art form with all my other video cameras for the most part. If you have no light, you have no light. But if there's any light anywhere that you can use, just use the light. Work the light source. Get closer to it. That's all it really is. Get closer to it and shoot at an angle where it looks flattering on your subject. And you have a light source. And if shit goes dark, let it go dark. You don't need to see a flat, non-contrasty image, especially if your subject is lit. If you're outside shooting at night, you don't need to see in the dark. You need to expose for the lights that are in the scene. And if there's no lights in your scene, why are you filming it? Or can you light the scene? Bring some fucking battery-operated LEDs. Even if it's a fucking mount on top of your camera deal, that's still a lot better than trying to get this nice, non-contrasty version of the fucking scene you're trying to produce. So there's that thing. But say you want to shoot in the fucking dark. Like, we're running through a low light thing, you're filming an event, you don't have the option of setting up lights, and there's just not enough. And if you've done a wedding, you know that this is a scenario that's very plausible. But there's just not enough light to get the job done. Well, everyone else is going to say, well, that's why you need full frame. You know, that you need the Sony AS2 or whatever, or the AS3 when it comes out. You know, because you can put the ISO at 128,000 and get a usable video. Well, I have figured out, by software I already own, the DaVinci Resolve 15 has spatial and temporal noise reduction. And here's a sample of that. And just to save time, I'm going to show you the 12,800 ISO. You know, I was filming my mom's cat, and there's the cat, and there's the cat with the 12,800 ISO. And then here's the cat after I run 2 noise reduction algorithms within DaVinci Resolve. Now, and blam, usable fucking footage. Is it perfect? No, you're not going to tweak your dynamic range. You have to expose properly in the camera to use this method. There's no over or under and then correcting later. You need to make sure you're dead on when you nail a shot like this with your exposure. You also, that's only part of the formula. So basically the recipe, if you want to get full frame noise reduction, you want to use your 12,800 ISO in your camera, there's several things you need to do. First of all, you need to shoot in the GH5's 6K mode, which is a square image that I'm filming on right now. Here, I'll zoom out. Yeah, see my lovely green screen action? And then zoom back in and put it back in normal. But this allows me a little leeway with cropping. I can move my frame around. But you're shooting also in HLG. Now, the advantage to shooting in HLG in terms of noise, HLG almost always crushes the blacks. It crushes the darkest parts of your scene so that they fall completely to black. Like my shirt right now on HLG is more than likely, other than the little bit of light it's catching, but when there's a shadow over it, that's going to be completely crushed by HLG. You can bring it up a little nudge, but most of what HLG preserves are the highlights, not the shadows. But the advantage of that is in that shadow area, when you're shooting HLG, is your noise floor. You're not going to see it. So even at 12,800 ISO with no noise reduction, your shadows are going to be clean unless you raise them. You know, but if there's midtones, those are going to be noisy as shit. Well, you throw these 2 algorithms on, and I see when shooting in 6K, and I downscale it to 4K, you know, and I do Cinema 4K. This image you're watching now is Cinema 4K, not UHD. Just by down-resing it that far, in addition to doing the noise reduction, I get a quite usable image. At the very least, now it's not as sharp as your sharpest 4K image, but it's not as dull as your sharpest fucking 1080p image either. And honestly, most people watching on devices and in YouTube, which is heavily compressed, you're not even going to notice the noise anymore. You're going to get a loss in color depth, but you're shooting in HLG, which gives you a huge color space that you're shooting in. And you're also shooting in 10-bit at 200 megabits a second when you shoot in the 6K mode. So I would think 6K mode is part of this formula, which makes it a little, you have to have a beefy computer to do this. I'm not saying this is a solution for everyone, but for me, I can get good low light performance out of the GH5, usable all the way throughout its ISO range, by slapping on this lens, filming in 6K with HLG as the picture profile with the 6K codec, take it into DaVinci Resolve. If I had to raise the ISO higher than 1600, throw some light noise reduction on 6400. Here's some footage of that through, you know, all the way up to, I'd say, 8000. You can do some lighter noise reduction, and that's a little easier on your system. But if I notice a lot of noise, I'm probably just gonna fucking throw it on 30 on spatial, 30 on temporal noise reduction. If you're familiar with it, just look up how to do noise reduction in DaVinci Resolve, which you can download for free, but you can't do the noise reduction unless you own it. But it's $300, and it's $300. In a full frame camera, at least this full frame camera is over $1,000 more than the GH5 for just the body, not to mention the glass. And you know, that means I can literally take this camera, the lens that's on it now, out without really doing much in terms, like, I don't necessarily need this lens. This lens definitely helps. Because one of the things you want to do to get a clean image at high ISO is really, you need it to expose well. Your scene still needs to be properly exposed, even at those high ISOs. otherwise you're going to get into this lower, you know, end of your tones, you know, from blacks all the way up to the lower mid-tones, and you're going to get a lot of noise and grain and lack of detail in those areas if you're shooting at 12,000. But if it's a brightly lit scene like this cat scene was, I'm serious, you're not even gonna notice that it was 12,800 ISO, in my opinion, especially if, you know, it's mixed in with a bunch of other scenes that are like that. You know, we're used to being able to see 1080, you know, so you might lose out on a little bit of that 4K detail, but every bit is much worth it. So I took the GH5 out to the lake, and here's a little montage of some of the shots I got with this lens primarily. I did a little bit with that and some with the Osmo Pocket, but I'm going to leave you with the end of this video with playing some different video samples. But ultimately, the bottom line, I believe, is that the GH5 can hold its own for video. Stills is another story. We'll try and do stills, but my Nikon's not going anywhere. I have that for the stills side of the house. 42 megapixel full frame image in terms of stills is going to beat the pants off of anything, even with the speed booster that I pull out of the GH5. However, if I'm traveling, I can get a good enough image. If I'm just posting to the internet and to social media, I can get a plenty good image. I wouldn't trust it for a client delivered image necessarily unless it's a second camera. But, you know, this could be my primary shooter. But this could be my primary shooter easily. The GH5 definitely with just this adapter. And there's like a $600 one that'll let you use the electronics in the lens. There's a $200 version from Viltrox that you could try. But I'm used to doing manual now. One of the things with the GH5 is the autofocus is meh. Even with the new firmware, I know a lot of people are saying it's much better, but I've taken it out, I've fucked with it. Sometimes it works flawlessly. Other times it hunts. I find that shutter speed has a lot to do with how well it does. So if you're fucking with your shutter speed, which is another thing you can fuck with to really cheat your exposure and maybe break the 180-degree rule a bit. But overall, the GH5, you know, if you're looking and you haven't bought your first camera yet, the GH5 seems very versatile because you can adapt Canon glass, you can adapt Nikon glass to it. The native glass is fucking exceptional. There's some Olympus lenses that are considered to be even sharper results than what I would get on my D850 in terms of optics. And pixel density is about the same between the two. It's just less pixels because it's smaller, but the pixel sizes are, I believe, are comparable. So is the noise level. In terms of the pixel density, the only reason it looks cleaner on a full frame is because you're getting 42 megapixels of noise with which to reduce. And make no mistake, this methodology could work for a Nikon or any other camera, but I'm here to tell you that it levels the playing field. Like, I wouldn't even consider going for the GH5S because I know I can shoot 12,800 and get a usable image out of this with a little bit of time. You know, set it up to render while you go to sleep. It renders at 1 frame a second, and that's my GTX 1070 NVIDIA card, and an i7 desktop, and you know, it's a pretty powerful system. It's not the most powerful system, but I generally get 1 to 1.5 frames a second at full, you know, noise reduction levels. For, you know, I don't go past 30 on those because I don't want it to get too soft. But I found it, there might be some things. Slap it on, see what it does for you. Test it out on different scenarios, especially the scenarios you shoot in most often. And I think you'll find that you can clean up almost every ISO. Now, 12,800, you don't need to go up that high. 8,000 is very usable, 10,000 if you're in a low light situation like that. But ultimately, you should be able to get by if there's a light in the room somewhere. Depending on where you place your subject and how close to that light they are, you can get by at ISO 1600 if you're professional and shit. Question, do I really need the shot if you have no light available to get the shot. You know, like if you're in a dimly lit room with only a candle and some fucking, maybe some Christmas lights or something, then you got to question, do I really need this shot? Do I need everything in the shadows is the other question, because I think it looks really good and interesting to leave a little bit to the mind by letting your shadows hit black. And I've, you know, this last film project I was involved in, we shot it as a high contrast film project with a whole lot of parts of scenes and actors falling to that black range. And I kind of like the look of that, because there's too much of this high contrast bullshit floating around anywhere. So I find that the higher contrast tends to stand out, and that's just the look that I enjoy. It's subjective. But there you go. I'm going to leave you with some footage I shot along with a little bit of adventure. And I want to thank Christy for coming out and helping me out with this and, you know, assisting me and making sure I get these shots. So I'll label the appropriate fucking camera footage. And I'll leave a little adventure at the end for those of you who want to stick it out. But all of this was shot either with this lens that's on here, the Panasonic 12-35, which is the 24-70 equivalent, or with this, which is pretty much a 50 mil f2 when you break down to it. I also found it's when I get it, try and stop it all the way down to get it sharper, it doesn't go through the full f-stop range of this lens. It stops probably just at f8. Like you can't go f11 with this adapter on this particular lens for some reason. I don't know why the hell that is. But enjoy the rest of the video and shit. And stop worrying about full frame. Micro Four Thirds can get the job done, I think. Especially if you want to be mobile, run and gun, travel. This camera's stabilization is fucking awesome. You don't need a gimbal. I bring my little Osmo Pocket for the fucking gimbal shots, which is this thing right here. It's in my pocket almost all the time. I mounted it to the top of the camera for a lot of the Osmo Pocket gimbal scenes that I worked into this little montage. But you know, I'll leave notes on the different shots for what I think you should be thinking about when you're looking at them and what lens they were shot with. But for a run and gun vlogger, the GH5 is all you need, really. Unless you're a serious photographer and you have client work, in which case you want to keep something like the Nikon D850 or a full frame photography camera for entirely different reasons. You want you want to deliver the client shit that they can't do with a smaller sensor. And there are things that you can't achieve in terms of image quality with the GH5 just because it's a smaller sensor, you know, and you don't get as many megapixels, you don't capture as much of the sharpness of the lens that you could capture. And there is a little bit of a difference in look in terms of video. There definitely is a different look to the Nikon D850's videos versus the GH5. But I just wanted to get on here and share with you what I was floored by when I took a look at the noise reduction. I was just fucking around. I was like, well, can I clean this image up? And I was like, oh my God, that's clean as fuck. And, you know, even if it was mildly noisy, I'd still be like, that's every bit as good as like 3200 or just over 1600. But honestly, with the 12,800, that with the cat picture that I did there, the cat video, that straight up is easily usable image at 12,800, assuming you got your exposure right and you used HLG to help reduce your noise, and shot at 6K, which seems to have a noise reducing effect in and of itself as well. So, all right, that's it. Watch the rest of my shit. Oh, and while you're here, like and subscribe. We're trying to build this channel up, so I do more of this type of videos and shit too. Or check out Scott the Truck Driver. I'll mention more in the rest of the video. I might even narrate some of this. We'll see. a lot of hiking. Shit. No, I'm good. I'll catch up. So if you like this fucking video, and you found it enlightening, or entertaining in any fucking way, please head to ScottThePhotographer.com. Leave a tip in the virtual tip jar. Overall, will this camera replace my Nikon? For video, absolutely. For stills, no. So if you take a lot of stills, go with the Nikon. Nikon's the shit. It's all uphill from here. But it was good to get out in nature even though it's fucking cold. Christie's way up there, running point. It's fucking beautiful. I want to show you that. All that pounding the Fuckmaster just isn't working when you do about, I think we did about 6 miles total, 5 miles total today. This is Chittenango Falls, by the way. So all the shit talking about full frame versus micro four thirds, I think it's safe to say, even though I didn't do stills work today, well yeah I did, a little bit, but for video with the Viltrox speed booster and the Nikon glass, this micro four thirds did everything I wanted it to do, and then some. Between the super slow motion 1080, between the time-lapse video function, I can't breathe.
You gonna make it?
Yeah, I'm gonna make it. I don't need a chair break yet. There might be a chair break tomorrow. Oh. Yeah. Adventure, some excitement and shit. Ow. But the stabilization, as you can see here, I'm shooting at 6K, and it's keeping it pretty fucking stable while I'm walking and climbing this fucking hill. Obviously the Nikon can't even touch that. And as far as low light performance, which is what everyone bitches about, when I use the speed booster, when I film in 6K HLG tends to crush the blacks, which keeps your noise levels down. I can shoot at ISO 12,800, and with a liberal amount of rendering time, I can fix the noise in post. So there's that. Yeah, we're locked in. I think so. We'll get through. I think we can get through. Said I think we can get through somewhere. Depends on how close to the cliff we want to get. Yeah. Don't fall. The fun part's going to be me doing that. Yeah. All right, hold on.
Come on, Scott. Don't be a bitch. I did it. Swing that leg around.
Yeah, but what happens on the other side when I rack my balls?
I don't know, because I don't have balls, so I didn't have to think about that one. What I did is I swung my foot around, You're just gonna have to do it. No, just gonna have to do it. Where are you going now? Oh. Oh. Looks like Scott found a way where he did not have to climb over the fence. You fucking pussy.
Work smarter, not harder. Oh, shit.
Completely.
You're still not warm? You're still not warm?
What?
Said you're still not warm?
No, I'm fucking freezing.
That sucks.
It does suck. I don't even know how that happened. Oh.
Blood and shit.
Yeah, there was more blood, but I licked it off.
That's a mortal wound. You might want to get that looked at. Do you need to go to urgent care after?
I might.
Yeah.
I might.
So please like and subscribe for more shit. I'll make more shit and shit. That's pretty cool there.
What?
I catch all the details of snot when I'm filming in 6K. Yeah.
See any up there?
And shit. Alright. That's it for this fucking video.
What a great fucking day.
Yeah, I was too lazy to even put a fucking microphone on, so sorry if the sound sucks. But have a nice motherfucking day.
And shit.
What was that?
And shit.
There you go.